This video is brought to you by Squarespace. The world of graffiti is filled with more drama and controversy than a damn episode of EastEnders.
Knock yourself out spraying, tagging, marking.
In a bid to make the biggest statement, mark territory, all whilst trying to avoid the police, it makes sense that rivalries will pop up.
I can't believe how some people say this is the second time they vandalize the thing, look on that.
But today we're going to focus on a 2-year-long feud between two of the most iconic graffiti artists on the planet and its very tragic ending. This is the Graffiti War.
Great artwork like this and I diss them do.
Now, if you mention the word graffiti in pretty much any social circle, any demographic, there's a good chance someone's gonna say, oh yeah, graffiti, what, like Banksy? Banksy is a phenomenon in the world of graffiti, revered and respected by polite society, with his most expensive piece called Love Is In A Bin selling for £16 million. This global respect for Banksy has always sat a little bit funny in the bellies of the wider graffiti community. And that's because there's always been this double standard around Banksy. You know, if Aerosol Andy got caught drawing a knob on a wall, he could go to jail. Whereas if Banksy done the exact same thing, they would very quickly pin a Perspex force field around the work of art and then sell that baby for thousands, if not millions.
I am a huge fan and I love Banksy's artwork.
So the very reasonable question that exists is, why does Banksy get such special treatment? To answer this, we need to see where graffiti started. Obviously, back in the day, Ugg and Zug were probably doing super S's on a cave wall. Egyptians were writing Pharaoh was here. But modern graffiti as we know it today started popping up around the 60s in Spanish Harlem.
Here, the law of the concrete jungle applies.
Around 1966 to 67, this trend was seen popping up all around New York's 5 boroughs, as well as Philadelphia. You know, people were just banging up their names on the wall to get a little bit of notoriety in the community. But it would be during the 70s where it would really start to grow, as these graffiti artists started to battle over notoriety, because there was beginning to be famous graffiti artists. You had Tacky 183, Cornbread, Cool Earl, and these guys had become local legends. But there would be one key location that would become the battleground for graffiti, and that was the train yards. If you were able to cover a train on every single line going around the city, your art would be visible across the entire city. This became the main objective for graffiti artists.
Getting a tag on each line and each division. You know, it's called going all city.
But as you might have suspected, there was of course a massive backlash.
Letters on the end of that card, is that an art form? I don't know, I'm not an art critic. But I can sure as hell tell you that that's a crime.
But then, as with anything vaguely countercultural, America exported it across the pond. Prior to the 80s, the UK did have a wall writing scene. You know, mainly it was just political hot takes. It was kind of like an analog version of Twitter. But in the 80s, the American style of graffiti would completely change the face of British walls, with one man in particular leading the charge. Born 1969, John Robertson grew up in a rough council estate in London. Throughout the 80s, John would become the founding father of the graffiti scene in the UK, living completely anonymously under the alias King Robbo. King Robbo was kind of known for his unique ability to access just about any train yard in London. He would tag these London trains and have his artwork all around the city.
Several trains had to be taken out of service after they were sprayed with Christmas messages.
For Robbo, it was the adrenaline rush. He loved the anti-authority attitude to graffiti and the kick he would get from knowing that he could go to jail at any point. And so between the 80s and 90s, King Robbo was the undisputed king of the UK graffiti scene. However, at the height of his fame in the 90s, King Robbo would put down his spray cans and completely retire from graffiti. This came as a massive shock to the wider graffiti community, but it was kind of understandable.
It was sort of time to sort of grow up and be responsible. I couldn't afford to get arrested and go to prison, because who's going to put my children when I'm in prison? I'm no good to them there.
It was time for him to move on. But you see, now it was the 90s. A new up-and-comer in the world of graffiti was prying to take King Robbo's spot. And in steps a young Bristolian by the name of Banksy. Banksy started out like most. He was a freehand graffiti artist, much like King Robbo, but in the early days he would only have minimal success. But it would be the adoption of one thing in particular that would change everything for Banksy, and that was the the stencil. Instead of spending hours slaving away freehanding an image, Banksy could now use a stencil, make a perfect image, and get out of there very quickly. This meant he could do more elaborate work and reduce the risk of being arrested. His images were so unique. They would often parody pop culture, they'd be humorous, a bit political. These clever images that Banksy became known for shot him into mainstream success, much to the dismay of the wider graffiti community. Before we go on with this video, I want to thank Squarespace for sponsoring. In today's world, you need a good looking website. If your website's slow, unresponsive, or just ugly, you're going to be turning away a lot of potential customers and potential money. However, Squarespace has you covered. It's super simple, quick to learn, and very intuitive. I'm currently using Squarespace myself on a project that I'm working on. I can't really tell you too much just yet, but what I can say is Squarespace has made it painless. There's a massive list of templates to choose from of loads of different styles, and it's as simple as picking the one you like and tailoring it to what you do. There's tons of built-in widgets as well, things like email marketing, appointment scheduling, and members-only content. So be sure to head over to Squarespace at www.squarespace.com/JimmyTheGiant. And to get 10% off your first purchase of a website or a domain, use the code JimmyTheGiant. Anyway, back to the video. You see, this introduction of stencils was frowned upon, to say the least. The OGs of graffiti would look down on Banksy, feeling as if he had no artistic skill. If hand-drawn graffiti was like a Michelin star meal, then stencils were your Rustler's hamburger. This wave of stencil artists actually led to a split in the graffiti community. Graffiti versus street art. Now, what's the difference? You might be wondering. Well, the lines are kind of blurry, but from my expert knowledge that I gained from 5 minutes of Googling, street art tends to refer to as big murals. They're typically very well designed, pristine, and they look very good to your average passerby.
And it's really fantastic news for us, the area, everything.
Whereas graffiti more so focuses on tagging names and words. It's often very cryptic, like only other graffiti artists tend to be able to read most of what's written. So they are very similar, but street art is often more respected. It's seen as art, whereas graffiti is seen as vandalism. This division had set the table for what was to be the graffiti war. It would be on one fateful day in the 90s, prior to Banksy's success, in a now burnt down Dragon Bar on Old Street, where a young, fresh-faced Banksy would come to meet the legend, King Robbo.
When I was introduced to Banksy, I went, "Oh yeah, I've heard of you, mate. How you doing?" And he went, "Well, I've not heard of you." So with that, I slapped him. I went, "What, you ain't heard of me? But you won't forget me now, will you?" And with that, he picked up his glasses and he ran off.
King Robbo felt that Banksy was deliberately disrespecting him. But you see, Banksy disputes that this ever happened. He was once asked for a comment by Channel 4, to which he said, "Is this a joke? I've never been hit by a Robbo in my life. I don't know who he slapped, but I hope they deserved it." Now you see, it wouldn't be until nearly 20 years later, where on the 1st of October 2009, King Robbo detailed this story, this encounter with Banksy, in a book called London Hand Styles. Now look, it's 2009. This is 20 years on from when Robbo even did graffiti. He was long retired. And as you can imagine, the graffiti that Robbo did all those years ago had now largely just disappeared. But there stood one single relic of King Robbo's legacy, known as Robbo Ink, which Robbo originally tagged in 1985. This was the oldest piece of London graffiti that was still standing. It stood underneath the London Transport Police's headquarters in Camden, on Regent's Canal. It was not only a very ballsy location, but it was also very hard to get to. You had to get a little dinghy and cross the water to get to the other side to tag it. However, on the 19th of December 2009, roughly 2 months after the publication of King Robbo's book, Banksy does the unthinkable. Under the cover of darkness, Banksy approaches Robbo Ink, and he covers it with his own piece called The Wallpaperer. This was sacrilegious. This was the most iconic piece, and Banksy had gone over it. This would be like going to the Egyptian pyramids and installing a McDonald's drive-thru. It was unbelievable what Banksy did, and along with that, he actually hit a few other pieces along the canal.
That was just downright wrong.
That is a calculated diss.
But the question is, why did Banksy do this? Well, it's kind of confusing. Banksy claims he didn't realise that he was covering up an old piece of history. He said, if you want things to last, then you shouldn't put them under a bridge on a canal. He also supplied a photo that he took in 2009 of what was there prior, where admittedly it did look very run down. But this excuse seems kind of unbelievable due to the timing. It was literally a couple months after the book. Banksy had broken the rules of graffiti, and there would be hell to pay. On the 25th of December 2009, King Robbo comes out of retirement. He heads to the canal spot and he goes to Banksy's work and he adds the tag King Robbo. This was a big deal. Over the course of that year, he went and attacked the other Banksy pieces on the canal with street cred on the 15th of January 2010. On the 25th of January 2010, he also hits the global warming piece with I Don't Believe in War, and Banksy's rat with Banksy Le Rat. Now, if you look very closely, you'll notice all of these attacks contained the phrase Team Robbo. The phrase Team Robbo basically became a to Banksy. It was kind of like a Call of Duty clan tag for anyone who was on Team Robbo's side of this beef. For the second interesting thing you'll notice is that King Robbo was directly taking a shot at Banksy's credibility. Banksy Le Rat had a hidden meaning to it.
He nicked the rats from Blek the Rat from France. He was the original rat stenciler.
Blek Le Rat was one of France's first graffiti artists, who was well known for tagging rats and human-sized stencils all around the cities. Which is funny really, because it was very similar to what Banksy was doing in the UK. Robbo was basically saying that Banksy is copying Blek Le Rat.
When I see Banksy making a soldier, or when I see Banksy making a Madonna with a child, or when I see Banksy making rats, of course, I see immediately where it takes the idea.
And this wasn't the first time that Banksy had been called out for this. In 2008, he did his very first ever interview with the Daily Mail, in which he says, every time I think I've painted something slightly original, I find out that Blek Le Rat has done it too, only Blek did it 20 years earlier. It all seemed a little bit weird. However, undeterred, Banksy would fire back. On the 1st of the 4th, 2010, Banksy would add the letters FUC in front of King Robbo, and he would launch counters on all of the other pieces that Robbo had hit. The two would go back and forth over these pieces. As well, Robbo was starting to tag other pieces that Banksy did outside of this canal. And this beef grew outside of just Robbo and Banksy. Fans were now getting involved, with Banksy fans writing the phrase, "Die Robbo." On the 8th of April 2010, Robbo goes back and hits Banksy's pieces, repairing the original King Robbo. He went on to claim Banksy wasn't the messiah that everyone saw him as. He basically told him he should go back to Bristol. As well, Robbo was saying that he himself is a proud working class lad, which I'm gonna guess is alluding to the fact that Banksy is very wealthy, yet always decries capitalism. But then on the 13th of August 2010, Banksy would pick up his ball and go home. Banksy literally just blacked out the original Robbo tag and painted over all of the other pieces. From the outside world, this could have been seen as Banksy almost accepting defeat. It wasn't exactly a great retaliation. And if you think about it, it kind of makes sense. Like, Banksy didn't really have a strong argument. Like, yeah, King Robbo was chatting shit on him in the book, but Banksy has the original sin. Going over that tag completely crossed the line. All Robbo needed to do was say that Banksy had no credibility. There wasn't anything he could really come back with. But your boy King Robbo was not done. He'd come out of retirement for this, you know, he wasn't just gonna give up. On the 26th of September 2010, he hits the now blacked out wall with a top cap with the phrase, "RIP Banksy's career," basically claiming victory. But you see, as all of this was going on, something else was happening to King Robbo. Around September, October of 2010, King Robbo had been invited to have his first ever art exhibition in a legit art gallery. Robbo put his whole livelihood on this. He borrowed money so that he could finish these pieces of art in the hopes that people might buy them and it might give him a future career as an artist.
Yeah, how bad would that be, making money out of something you love doing?
The event starts and it is a massive hit. Loads of people come. He sells loads of art.
We've got one guy who's reserved 2 pieces.
No! But there were 2 people that turned up to this exhibition who weren't looking to buy any artwork. And that was Banksy's PR team.
Can I ask what you think about Robbo's exhibition?
I'd rather not, it's alright.
They turned up to this art exhibition to see if King Robbo had made any disses to Banksy, which surprisingly, King Robbo decided not to. After this exhibition, Robbo's career starts to really pick up. He's invited out to Berlin to make a piece on the actress Zoe Kravitz as part of an advertising campaign for the film Yelling to the Sky. Coincidentally, this piece happened to be right next to a Banksy. Robbo saw this as an opportunity to prove that hand-drawn graffiti was better than stencils. And on the 11th of February 2011, King Robbo finishes his piece. He shows it to Zoe Kravitz and she is in love.
You know, he stands out for a reason, that his talent shows through his work, and I think it's just the beginning for him, and I'm honored to be part of it.
Robbo's career was about to blow up. But you see, just prior to Berlin, back in England. On the 15th of January 2011, Banksy had returned to Regent's Canal, where he'd done this strange response called Fish for Freedom, which honestly I don't think anyone could make head or tail of. And so as King Robbo returns to England and sees what Banksy has done, he plans to retaliate. However, it'd be here where tragedy would strike. Around the early hours of the 2nd of April 2011, a lady by the name of Louisa Green was travelling past in a taxi, where she spotted King Robbo lying on the ground unconscious. As she saw this and drove past, she called an ambulance. From here, he was rushed into hospital and placed into a coma. However, there was a mystery as to what had happened. King Robbo was outside of his flat, where it's believed by complete accident he fell down some stairs and landed on his head. This came as such a shock to the graffiti world. It happened out of nowhere, just as King Robbo was getting the recognition he deserved by the mainstream world. He was finally starting to earn a living from doing the thing he loved, graffiti. But there he was, laying in a hospital bed, put into a coma. And it is there where he'd continue to lie for many months. Whilst King Robbo is still in a coma, a few months later, on the 10th of November 2011, Banksy would return to the canal and pay tribute to King Robbo, reinstating a version of his original piece with a spray can at the bottom to symbolise a vigil. This was a message from Banksy to show respect to King Robbo and to end the feud. A few months later, on Christmas Eve of 2011, members of Team Robbo would reinstate the original piece of Robbo Inc. Unfortunately, that piece would eventually deteriorate and re-show Banksy's. Many years would pass as King Robbo lied in a coma. His friends, his family, and the graffiti world didn't know what was going to happen. But on the 31st of July 2014, news had spread that King Robbo had passed. On the 1st of August 2014, after his passing, a final tribute would be placed in respects to Team Robbo, consisting of one of Robbo's very first tags, classic Robbo art, which stands there at Regent's Canal till this day. Rest in peace, King Robbo.